All right, welcome back, everybody. So you've got Tim along with the Dungeon Delver and Richard Witters. Bill, the Dungeon Delver, runs the best educational first edition Dungeons and Dragons live stream on YouTube. He's a fantastic dungeon master and has not done a total party kill, but he has wiped out a few characters now and again on the Tuesday night game. Um, Richard is, of course, an artist from formerly from Wizards of the Coast that worked on both Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering, and then became an art director where he got to herd the cats and try to get everybody to do what they were told, which is far less fun than being an artist. I'm going to bet.
It can be.
Hey, when they put me in charge of engineers, I was like, please, please don't. I don't. Can I be a contributor and not the guy who has to get everybody to do their job? And they're like, nope, you're in charge. I'm like,
Wrangler.
can I vote against myself? Anyway, tonight we're talking about beholders, and we've done a couple of these videos before, and I'm going to keep doing more of them, drilling into the differences in between early editions of Dungeons and Dragons and later. And what we're finding is there's some changes in leveling of characters, there's some changes in certain types of attacks on certain creatures. Certainly, Thaco is different, but a lot of YouTube channels will dive into, oh, first edition is great, second edition is great, third edition, fifth edition is the devil, and it's going to cause the world to stop rotating on its axis, and we're all going to die. So, no bombshells here, no crazy conspiracy theories about what comes next, and certainly um, crises, nothing falling through the sky. So, I did want to dig into beholders because they show up all over the place. And beholders actually have an interesting history. So I'm going to see if I can properly share our screen here. And, they show up on the covers of things, they show up all over. And the interesting bit about them is they're one of the creatures that really didn't have, it wasn't pulled from someplace, right? It wasn't pulled from, some other history of some other fiction series. It was pulled from a nightmare that Terry Kuntz's brother Rob had, and then apparently Terry told somebody at work, and it wound up in the game. Bill, you've actually talked to him. You want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've talked a little bit to Rob, and it was between 74 and 75. The original set of Dungeons and Dragons, of course, came out in 1974. And almost immediately, people were clamoring for more classes, more options, that sort of thing. And the Lake Geneva gaming crowd, which included Rob Kuntz and his brother Terry, were both very much a part of that. I mean, Rob was instrumental in the shaping of early Greyhawk, as much as Jim and Gary were, as well as his own stuff. But so when Terry thought of the Beholder, it immediately made its way into play at Gary's table. And so between 74, the release of OD&D, and mid 75, the release of Supplement 1 Greyhawk, which we see on the screen there. And of course, adorning the cover is a very blasé looking beholder. He's not putting up with that fighter's crap, and that fighter's probably toast. But it made its way into Greyhawk right then and right there. And like you say, Tim, this was not a goblin, it was not an orc, a giant, a dragon, and Etten. So if we can cast our minds, metaphorically speaking, back to that time, there's all sorts of fantastical stuff coming from Tolkien and Howard, and yes, even Lovecraft, and a myriad of other authors. But here is something that is completely around the bend. What do you mean it's a 6 foot wide sphere with eye stalks all over it? I mean, so here is something truly revolutionary. And yeah, that had to be quite a shock, because remember, there's no internet back then. If you're getting Dungeons and Dragons fresh off the boat, as it were, you go down to your local hobby shop and you're like, what in the hell is that on the cover? You know?
So Richard, if somebody came to you with trying to describe this, and said, "Hey, as an artist, I need a basketball with a bunch of eyes and teeth," what what would your first gut reaction be on that? Because I'm not sure how I would go for it.
I can tell you questions we've gotten from artists before. Um, like, does it have a butthole? Things like
That's a valid question because it doesn't have feet, right? Somehow it gets around and it doesn't have any feet. So there.
yeah.
They're described as being very hateful, so I would imagine not. I mean,
Yes.
is going to
It
be.
clearly eats. I mean, because it kills
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. It's well, well, I don't know. Most of its teeth look like ripping and tearing teeth. It doesn't have any chewers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. No, it's like the Beholder was one of the ones that was always like, oh, it's gonna be like you want it to look wild and freaky. Um, that's why you kind of tried to lean into other things to be realistic, like make the armor and weapons look kind of believable and this and that.
Mhm.
Because this thing looks weird, but it's super. I love drawing monsters like that. To tell you the truth.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an interesting point because as a fiction writer, I've talked to a bunch of other writers and I talked to a bunch of avid readers and book reviewers, and one of the things I hear commonly about what used to be B authors, right? So back in the day when they're actually book stores, there were A-list authors, B-list authors, and C-list authors are sort of the pulp fiction stuff.
Yeah,
And A-list authors were kind of, that's the Tom Clancy and those guys. Then the B-list authors are people who kind of are straight to paperback, and then the pulp fiction guys are guys who just crank out a book every 3 weeks, right? And they all serve their purpose. But one of the things I found from readers is that one of the things that they would always kind of pick on about C-list authors is there's a limit to how far people are willing to suspend disbelief. So it's interesting you bring up, make the armor believable and make the other characters believable, because that's clearly not, right? That's clearly nuts. So there is a limit to just how far people are willing to go in their fantasy world, right? There's that fine line in between too fantastical and fantastical enough for today. Right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a giant like suspension of disbelief
Uh-huh.
is a huge line that you always kind of think of where it's like how much of this are people going to buy or does this have enough icing on it to sell it,
Exactly.
Yep.
So yeah, I find it interesting you bring that up because as a writer, I never thought about that as an artist, but because I'm clearly not an artist. If you look at anything I draw, there's a website. There used to be a website called stickdeath.com, which was stick figures that killed each other quite often, using
Yep.
early script stuff on the internet. That's sort of my level of artwork, right? So it's it's like, ooh, the dog is still a stick figure, right? That's my limit. But as somebody who's an art appreciator, there are people who you look at their art and you're like, okay, I can get into that. Salvador Dali kind of comes to mind, right? Who's freaky, but
Mhm.
not, he's on the edge of being a little too freaky for some people.
Yep.
And then there's some people that try to do Dali style and they just take it too far and you're like, okay, that's just weird. But and Dali was weird enough. Every once in a while you'll see like a painting or something that's a piece of artwork, and I get the impression that Beholder's kind of one of these where you kind of want to tell people, I'm like, okay, the rule is puff puff pass, not puff 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 puff, right? Maybe I'm riding that off the rails there, but anyway. But the thing I found when I was researching this was Beholders, that's their genesis, right? They showed up right there in the 70s. They didn't exist before then, but they've shown up everywhere since then, including movies, right? So
Yep.
it's you can make a claim, oh gee, was John Carpenter a Dungeons and Dragons player? Did he know the game or not? But Beholder had kind of gotten into pulp into pop fiction so much that it showed up in Big Trouble in Little China right there, right? And
Well,
all
Yeah, I
of
don't think there was a one of us back when that movie dropped, whether we saw it, rented it on tape or caught it on HBO or saw it in the theaters who didn't go, Beholder! As soon as
Uh-huh.
the thing popped up on the screen. We all knew what it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
All the D&D
Absolutely.
guys did. Everybody else was like, what the hell is that? I'm sorry, Richard, go ahead.
No, it's a her. Why do we behold it?
I know, right?
No,
But
yeah, it's spread. It's like it's like the previous version of creepy pasta. Because I think like the biggest character to come out of creepypasta stuff was like Slender Man, and that kind of caught on, and then people would go back and it's like, oh, is that out of some folklore or something like that? Like, no, it was out of a contest. Somebody was to make up a creepy story online. Um, yeah, no, it's crazy. It's like to think that just somebody had a dream and then came out of that, but they actually wrap that lore into the creature is awesome.
yeah, and I thought it was great. So when I started looking around and Bill, you sent me a bunch of these. Thank you for that. And I don't want to dig into each stat block, but it's important to know that Beholder has shown up in a various forms through a lot of core rule books, and then of course in different modules and different um, sort of side stuff. So like Dragon Magazine, sometimes you'd see a new one, you'd see them pop up here and there, but their stats are always a little bit different. They've always got a few different capabilities, and it has evolved over the years, right? So some of them, Eye of the Deep, can you say it's a beholder? Well, it's not technically, but it's a spheroid with eye stalks, so we'll call it one.
I it definitely Gary points out that it's obviously related to its land dwelling cousin.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a distant cousin of some kind. Um, in fifth edition, there are multiple types of beholders, everything from the Death Tyrant to the Spectator to a zombie beholder, which would be a unique one to throw into a campaign. Bill, don't get any ideas. My character has lived for at least 3 weeks. We'd like to make it to 5. Because I'm not sure how you take that one down. But as well as the regular beholder. And the thing that's interesting about them is their types of attacks and their special defense. So one of the things that Dungeons and Dragons players do typically is if you get something big like this, it's tough to do. You call out the heavy artillery and get, a mage to go start casting fireball or lightning strike or meteor swarm or something, right? But it's got
Yep.
this anti-magic ray right there under special defenses
Yeah.
that doesn't go away, right? It's still in fifth edition. So say what you want about, making fifth edition easier or different. And yeah, Richard, you said it the other day, we were talking, I don't think fifth edition when it comes to creatures has necessarily gotten easier, but I think it has gotten more rule lawyery. I think that was the phrase you used.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about that a little bit?
Um, yeah, like I've talked about that before. I think actually it's I used to talk to my friend about it, because we were making a game that we're uh what we're working on now, but that we're trying to simplify. I guess what I referred to it as was when we talk about it is like functions,
Mhm.
right? So it's like if I could go through a description, like what does this monster do? And it does blah and blah unless blah plus blah if blah. you know, like does X but not X if X and but X and if X.
Mhm.
So if there's a lot of functions, just as a DM, I find it a little bit like what am I doing here now? Like what's this? That's a lot for one thing, and then you go on. What's another thing it can do? um, Especially with the beholder, because it has all the different eye stalks and this and that. So uh, yeah, I did find fifth and uh, I would say the modern editions, like third, fourth, fifth, all had a bit of that. Um, Fourth actually had some of those, kind of functions, but it was probably easier to at least read because they really broke them out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's interesting thought, right? So the earlier editions were really more, so it all came out of gaming, right? So it came out of Avalon Hill War Games, and it was designed to make, there you got to sort of imagine you were the British fighting the Americans in the Revolutionary War, but it was really restrictive on what you could do. And
Hmm.
these guys wanted something that was much more flexible, and sure enough, early editions, that flexibility is everywhere, right? As a DM, Bill can decide, oh, hey, we just encountered a nest of owlbears, and it's going to hug you until your bones are crushed and it's chewing on your spine.
He's never
Um,
going to go.
not that happened.
Mm,
Um,
no,
I
that-
still hold no grudge about, but I still have a pain right about that. Um, but here you're right. It does get kind of, okay, this happens, then that happens, then that happens. It sort of removes that from the equation to a certain level.
Hmm.
I don't know if that was an attempt to sort of standardize gameplay across different tables, or if that was just an attempt to kind of respond to something that was going on in the industry. But it certainly has changed. But at the same time, the one thing I actually do appreciate about fifth edition is
Hmm.
that they took the monster manual, and all these pictures are from the monster manual, so I can go to one place and get all kinds of things about different kinds of beholders instead of having to go over here and then to this supplement and then to that dragon magazine and then over here. Right. So it's all in one place. So if I want to kind of like find one, it's like, okay, I know where to go, right? I know where to look. It's all in one spot. Uh,
Yep.
and if and as a player, if you come up against one and you've read the books, you at least know what to expect. Whereas a DM could say, "Oh, an experienced player, well, let's see if we can twist this around," right? So it gives you a little bit better fighting chance in a melee if you're the player with fifth edition, I would think, because it allows a little bit less creativity on the DM side.
Yep.
And Bill, as a DM, you like creativity, if I'm not mistaken, sir.
I do. I do. Although I will say, catch you while you're sipping your coffee, I will say that supplement creep is not endemic just to original, basic, anything like that. When Wizards of the Coast gets, or rather, I'm sorry, let me just take a step back. When TSR got going with second edition, you had this same concatenation of all monsters in a single place.
Mhm.
When OD&D rolled in, if you wanted a beholder in your game, well, it wasn't in the three little books. You had to go buy supplement one Greyhawk, and likewise, if you wanted the assassin class, you had to go buy supplement two Blackmore. It's kind of this constant ramping up in editions, and then the new edition concatenates everything in. So you have the advantage in second, third, fourth, fifth uh, of all the beholder stuff being in one place. But tomorrow, if Wizards of the Coast introduces a new beholder, well, now you've got to go to a different place to get that. So it's
You,
just it's
you're right.
endemic across
Yeah,
editions.
and I see some of that in the fifth edition stuff. I was going to grab one, but it's out of reach. So you do see some of that in the fifth edition books that come out after the release of the three core books. There certainly is some creep, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but the game by the time fifth edition came out had been around what, like 40 years or something. So it's probably 10 years back now.
40,
Hmm.
Um,
yeah,
so
yeah,
so
40.
you had 4 decades of stuff to try to put in one spot, and there's a lot of angst, and I won't say angst. I think there's a lot of heartburn in the community about the upcoming release of the new edition. And anxiety might be a better word. But one of the things
Hmm.
that's kind of nice is that I think we can anticipate with very great degree of likelihood is that you're again going to have that concatenation where it'll have everything in one place. You may not like the presentation, you may not like any rule change, but at least have, sort of this, you go one place and you can see everything without having to go to 20 different books. Which is
That
always
definitely sounds like what they're doing. And that goes for a lot of things. Like, it sounds like they'll have a lot of the even some of the classes that weren't originally in sort of the first version of fifth edition.
Mhm.
That they'll have more of those in their races, things like that.
Yeah,
So
we'll
yep.
see how it goes. But let's dig in the difference. So, Bill, thank you for sending me all this. And beholders are not necessarily all that rare. They are probably one of the more common things I see on D&D merchandise. Right, they show up kind of on coffee mugs and T-shirts and um, wall hangings. They're everywhere, right? So they show up a lot, but they're not necessarily. They do say rare, but they're around in different modules. They're not completely super
Yeah,
crazy rare.
in published modules, you got not a tremendous amount of them. This was just what I remembered off the top of my head in AD&D modules. They can be drawn in an illusory deck, but as long as the card remains within range of the deck, the illusion is real. In EX1 Dungeon Land, and then S3 Expedition of the Barrier Peaks, one that's near to all of our hearts, I know. There is an Eye of the Deep,
Mhm.
and then there's a chance you could run into one at random and descend into the depths. But there, at least for first edition AD&D and original Dungeons and Dragons, there are no set piece adventures where they show up like there's always a beholder in this cave, or there's always a beholder in this cave complex, or what have you. So, as touted as they were in original and first edition, they didn't start to show up as regularly encountered creatures until until second edition. But yeah, they do show up from time to time, and they can be fun encounters.
Hmm. I'm going to put fun in air quotes there because
Fun encounters.
you can also get a TPK pretty quick because, let's look at new versus old here. And I broke it out a little bit. So the thing that gets me is they still have anti-magic, right? So you're
Yes.
kind of like, I can't call out the heavy artillery. I can't just be like, you just fireball it, right? Just blow it up, call it a day. And if there's a Kender over there saying, "Oh, the beholder's cute," you fireball the Kender, right? We're good with that. I
I'm
was
good
doing
with
that for Bill because he hates
Tinder in
Kender.
general.
I think they're fun, but that's just me. But the first thing I found was the number of eye rays changed, right? So in first edition, you had 11 different effects, one from different eyes, and they could range from charm and fear to disintegration and teleportation. So it could teleport things, it could do all kinds of stuff. And Bill, I'm gonna throw this one on you. If you were a DM and you had a teleportation device at your disposal as a creature, what would be your favorite thing to teleport?
So it's funny you bring that up. I think with the beholder, I don't have my monster manual open. I could pull one off the shelf, but that always leads to books falling on me on the show, so I'm not going to do that. But it's telekinesis. It can pick you up and throw you, but they're actually there's no reason you couldn't have just substitute that. It's DM's whim. If things that I could teleport, I like turning characters invisible
Mhm.
and teleporting them away. And then the party can't see where they went. So you can threaten the party, say, "Oh, I think Bob got disintegrated." Yeah, he's teleported a mile away. It's going to take him a while to get back to the party. Uh, so teleporting characters or telekinesing characters and just moving them out of the way, however you do that, that is actually my favorite thing to do with those spells is to, I, Frotz the Great Wizard, will, whoa, you just throw him out of the way when he raises his hand and starts muttering his magical incantations. You either teleport him out of the way or you grab him with telekinesis and you chuck him across the lawn.
Yeah, and charm and fear are always those two good are also good too, right? So
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm sure Richard, you've probably seen charm or fear show up in a game someplace.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've always found the fear one a weird mechanic because it's like, especially with a beholder, because if the players aren't afraid at that point,
Very afraid,
I
right?
am the brightness ball of hate isn't making you afraid.
yes, yeah. Yeah, and if I want them more afraid, like you said, for an undead beholder, it'd be like, okay, and the beholder has level drain. Are you afraid now?
Oh, level
Um,
drain. Oh my God. That's
but
not
I
fun.
can tell you the most disappointing beholder I had, and it wasn't that great, but I did happen to have a game where a beholder was kind of coming up out of this tunnely circle kind of thing, and the players, like, I was sort of having it manifest there as if it was coming from an outer realm or something. So I kind of gave them a round to kind of react to this. They somehow managed with lucky rolls and things to kill it before it even manifested, and I was like, well, that sucked.
I've had this. So the two times I've used beholders in my Monday night AD&D campaign, this is a group. It's varied from 9 to 15. It's currently sitting at 12 players.
Hmm.
Beholder encounter in the woods disintegrated the party magic user. I was feeling it. I was like, yeah, this is. And then they proceeded to another character in the party hit it with lightning bolt, and everybody else charged it with a capital C and hacked it to death in the next round.
Yep.
That I have never seen such a flurry of successful hits in my life. And this one was 75 hit points. I went
Hmm.
the big bad guy. The second one got a fireball off and did some other damage to the party. Didn't slay any characters, but again, they dogpiled in a couple of rounds. It was dead. Does that make beholders a glass cannon? I don't know. I will say that I what a lot of early DMs tend to miss is the fact that in the fluff text in the description for the beholder, it states how many eye stalks it can bring to bear. I think a lot of the fear of beholders in classic editions comes from the idea that all 11 of those eyes can hit at exactly the same time, and that's not true. It's it's
Hmm.
got it's got a change of facing. If it like if you determine that the fireball eye stalk points to the rear, it's going to have to turn around, which means no anti-magic ray, you
Hmm.
know, if it wants to hit you with that one. Or lower its head, as it were, so all of its eye stalks are pointing at you. But again, no anti-magic ray. So again, I don't think they're overstated. You know, when I call them 6 foot diameter chitinous balls of hate, I'm not kidding around. An unprepared, you know, if the party either time I had thrown them at them had been like, well, okay, we'll fall back, you know, let's fall back and form an arc around it. I'd have been like, oh yeah, you guys do that. Yeah, yeah. Think around it, guys. It's a round creature. Attack it from all angles.
So
But
that's when my other coffee mugs comes out that says when the DM smiles, it's already too late because it's
I've always got a smile on my face, Tim.
always too late.
All in my heart.
So in first edition they had 11 different effects. In fifth edition they've only got 6, but that's still 6 you got to go worry about, right? And it's charm, paralysis, fear, slowing, disintegration. There's all kinds of things that these things can do to you. And like you said, Bill, the delivery is a little bit different. And in the fifth edition, they only fire 3 random eye rays at any time, which is interesting because it makes it just kind of hard to figure out what the hell they're going to do next, right? Because you can get set up and stacked up against one type of attack because, oh, the beholder's doing this. Well,
Mhm.
next round it's doing something else because it's purely random, and that's different.
Mhm.
All right, targeting. So this one I found interesting. It's a little bit different in between first, second, and third. It floats around a little bit. In some, it could choose an eye ray for each one, and others it can't. But in fifth edition, beholders choose 3 targets for their eye rays, but the specific effect the target receives is randomly driven. So it can decide, hey, I'm going to attack the highest level fighter. All the guys in plate armor, they're going out first, but it can't really decide for itself which attacks go which place. That's purely random,
Mhm.
which I don't really view that as a, I don't know, that to me is sort of a push. I mean, I get why they made the change, but it's sort of a, it doesn't make the beholder any more or less dangerous in my view. I mean, you guys have been playing for a long time. Do you see that as a plus or a minus anywhere?
Uh,
Mm,
Go ahead, Richard.
yeah, there's a. I don't mind the randomness.
Mhm.
I always used to have a mechanic, or I used to have a sort of a side rule, I guess, or a mechanic I used to call break 20. Um, this is more if you have positive attack bonus or something. But if somebody did an attack that was higher than 20, which you could get with adjustments,
Mhm.
So either a critical or something higher, if you modified, I'd let them take out an eye stock, and then I would randomly determine which eye stock they would kind of dismantle on it. Um, but yeah, I don't mind the random kind of one. To me, it's the interaction with the player, right?
Mm.
Like if I actually have that stop moment at the game and be like, okay, it's you know it's going to use its eye on you. What do you think you're gonna get? Like why don't you roll me a D10 or or in fifth edition like a D6 or whatever. Like to me, it's like whatever works with the interaction with players. I like connecting with the players and saying, let's all watch because you're gonna roll this.
That's an interesting point. I actually occasionally as a DM, this has nothing to do with beholders, but I haven't DM'd in a lot of years, and I'm probably going to start, except for my kids. But occasionally, one of the things I like doing as a DM is just randomly asking a player to roll something.
Uh-huh.
I have no intention of doing anything with it. I'm just like, roll a d6 for me.
Oh, there's no better DM thing than to be like, you rolled it, right? like what? I have the head of a goat. It's like you rolled it. I'm like I
You
didn't
rolled
roll
it. Not my fault, man.
it.
Now saving throws, I like this one. Okay, this actually kind of makes a little bit of sense to me because I think what they were trying to do here on saving throws was keep game tempo alive, right? So sometimes you make changes for rules because it's a character a creature is too overpowered. Sometimes you make it for game tempo and keeping things moving. And what they did was they took the saving throws in first edition and made it kind of you had to have one saving throw for each type of effect. Whereas in fifth
Mhm,
edition, it's just a single saving throw. And it seems to make things much quicker.
mhm.
I don't know. But Bill, you're the first edition only person, so I just love to get your input on this one because you love first E and you're not enamored with the other later editions. But
Well,
so.
first edition by preference, but
Mhm.
I vastly prefer the more granular saving throw system
Mhm.
of first edition AD&D. I like the fact that the cynical, more street-oriented mind of the thief makes him less susceptible to magic attacks. That the wisdom of the cleric gives him a little bit more mental insight into the nature of other kinds of attacks and so on and et cetera. The granularity of AD&D's saving throws and well, of course, that speaks to original D&D and all the various forms of basic, essentially any D&D prior to 1998.
Mhm.
Um, Really is my preference. The way the beholder worked in AD&D, I'm just real quick. um so I salts 1 and 2, that's charm person and charm monster as the spell, sleep as the spell, telekinesis of 250 pounds, which does not get a saving throw, I don't believe. Flesh to stone ray, anti-magic ray, disintegrate ray, fear as a wand, slow spell, cause serious wound, and a death ray. And I like the fact that there are all these variables in there that a given character might have to consider once this thing kind of shows its hand or its eyeball, as the case may be. Um,
Mhm.
and I feel like the that that gives a little bit more, a little bit more narrative texture. There's this great scene in I think it's one of the mid-aged Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories where they're trying to go back into the storied city of their origin, and they immediately are confronted by all the people that they ripped off, stabbed in the back, however, waiting for them at the city gates. And there's this quartet of magicians casting a death spell at Mouser. And when he sees them getting ready and starting to chant, he pulls out a weighted copper line and just starts swinging it. And as soon as they let go with their spell, he lets go with a line, and it charges the copper wire, which lands on them and electrocutes them. I always thought that was a great scene and a great definition of a quote unquote saving throw. But to bring it back over to the beholders, to bring it back home, I like the fact that its eyeballs act in different ways. Like some of them act as wands, some of them act as actual spells, and you have to look on the chart and consider where it's at, not just for the player, but for the dungeon master, because it makes the dungeon master think tactically about how he wants to use the beholder in combat.
I can see that. I get that, but so and I used this comparison the other day. I was talking to Harmony, I think it was, on her live stream, and some people, when you look at first edition versus fifth edition, or rules as written versus homebrew versus other stuff, I think there's a couple of different ways to look at various editions of Dungeons and Dragons, and I kind of call first edition, at least in my head, D&D on hard mode. So if you think back to like the old Doom video games, you had easy mode, medium, and oh my god, what am I trying to do here, right? You had the really hard version. And I think sometimes if you go back to further back editions, it does get a little more complex as both a player and a DM. And I think what they're trying to do with the later editions is turn it into more of an easy mode, if that makes sense. Because Wizards of the Coast has still got all this older stuff on Drive-Thru RPG. It's still out there. You can still buy it. You can download the PDF files and use them. So the older stuff's not going away. It's still out there. And some of these were not shockingly rare dungeon modules or games. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of them out there. And any dungeon module I've ever wanted to go back and find that kind of got lost over the years or disintegrated, I've never gone to eBay and not found the exact one I was looking for, right? So they're always out there somewhere. Oftentimes you can find them shrink wrapped if you want to spend $300. I'm not willing to spend $300, by the way, because the first thing I'm going to do is use the actual module, not, let me put it in glass and hang it on a wall. Right? That's not.
Yeah.
It drives people crazy that I will buy, these really nice first edition books and then actually pick them up and read them. People look at me like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm enjoying the story in the book. Yeah. Call me silly. But anyway, so last page of differences. Overall, beholder attacks are like you say, Bill, they're more diverse, they're more powerful, and they can be overwhelming, right? You can do a TPK pretty fast. I mean, it's never happened to anybody here, but the potential is there. And Bill, I'm going to take a swing at it and say some of the groups you've DM'd over the years survived these attacks because they were probably experienced players that knew what they were doing. Because you get an inexperienced group that sees one of these things and just does it wrong, right? The types of attacks you use can cause a big difference between a party surviving and a party doing TPK and rolling up new characters before the next game.
Well, and you hit on something, right? And I've said this before. Although I do want to correct you. I did have a TPK on the Tuesday night game, but it was before you joined. But I've said this before. Give me an experienced group of players, 5th, 6th level, 8 to 10 of them. That group of players can take on the Tomb of Horrors and probably survive it with minimal casualties. Give me an inexperienced group of players, and I will give each of them a 12th level character, and they'll be toast before they make it out of the entry hall. So it really does play heavily into classic editions, play heavily into player skill, not just what's on the character sheet.
I think that's part of it. And fifth edition, beholder attacks are more streamlined, focused on creating tense and unpredictable encounters. That's the randomness of it. And the only other things I could find that were any different were first edition. And thank you for fixing this for me, Bill. I had psionic abilities. They're actually not, but some of their eye stalks do give them psionic-like abilities.
Right.
That
Charm, spells, the fear,
charm, yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Whereas fifth edition have some legendary actions that allow them to take actions on other creatures' turns, making them more dynamic and challenging opponents. Which is really the only differences. And when we first did the first one of these videos, Bill, on the owlbear, I was kind of upset that the hug attack went away. I thought it was kind of neat. I can see what they did. They leveled the owlbear around because those things are freakishly deadly in first edition. But the hug attack I kind of missed. And the more I dig into it, I'm more like, okay, but I can still play first edition rules. I don't have to play fifth edition rules because we live in a world where both exist. And if I'm playing fifth edition, am I going to add the hug attack back? I probably would as a DM just because I'm crazy like that. But beholders, by and large, I'll let you guys take your shot at it, but I don't think they've gotten weaker throughout the editions. I think they've just changed.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not crazy about it's random attacks in the next round, because if I as a DM have found what works and what's kicking a party's ass, I want to keep doing that every round. I don't want something that I have to recalculate for. That's, to me, that's kind of like if you were playing a naval war game, and in this round you use the Iowa's 16-inch guns and you're blasting the hell out of the Japanese. In the next round, you use the 5-inch guns. Oh man.
Yeah. I think that's the thing, what you were talking about there too, Bill. If like I used to be, when I looked at a monster like that, like a beholder, who may be completely mad but is actually very intelligent, they would have tactics and they would kind of say, well, who do I want to take out first? Right. And a lot of times in old school stuff, it might be like the mage. The mage could be your big problem, right? So then you're like, which eye stalks and which attacks that it can use are most effective on the mage? Which ones are most effective on the fighter? Which one are most effective on the cleric? And I'd be thinking that way with the strategy before I ran that one. So I do find that kind of fun with the later, I guess with fifth edition, there's still some of that, because you would be like, well, your cleric will probably have high wisdom, your mage will have high intelligence, and each of those have saves associated with them. So you could do the attacks. But yeah, I definitely think that that gets down to the thing of like, are the monsters sort of templated, or do the monsters actually use tactics like players do? And there was something about when we started playing first edition that I think it's just because it was such a new game, not just to us, but to the world, that you kind of were constantly asking what you could do, right? Like, can I put a ladder here and do this? Can I get behind this? Can I trick it into here and drop something on it? So there definitely was a lot less focus on what widgets are on my character sheet that my character can do, and it was much more about anything else you could pull off.
So it's like the Jackie Chan fight versus the well-organized John Wick fight, right? It's like, oh, I found deer antlers, stab the guy, right?
Well, it's all these little questions, right? And you get people thinking, where it's like you're down in the sewers and it's like, okay, I light a torch, and the DM's like, are you sure you want to do that? And then the players will be like, wait a second, methane ignites. Like,
when the DM says, are you sure you want to do that?
Yeah.
That's
that's actually a good point. So I will say that I don't think they've gotten I will amend my previous statement. As you go to fifth edition, I don't think they've gotten weaker per se, but I think their ability to use strategy inherently has weakened them because you can't really like, okay, I'm going to attack the mage this way. You say, I'm going to attack the mage, but how I'm going to attack him is random. And that random effect may alter the outcome of that. So you're right in that they have similar, if not the same abilities. Okay, fewer eye stalks, but they're still, crazy creatures. But they are less worrisome from the TPK perspective because it is more randomized. So you have a better chance of surviving that attack now than you did before. So I'll agree with that. That actually makes sense to me. Because you kind of take the strategy part out of it. But that's kind of all I have for Beholder. So far in this series of videos, we've done owlbears, we've done Beholders, and what was the other one we did? I'm completely drawing a blank.
Gelatinous
Mimic?
cube?
Mimics. We did mimics, yes. So next up, I don't know what I'm gonna do. The gelatinous cube seems like a kind of boring one to do, but I'm going to come up with a creative one. I think it might be some sort of a goblin attack, just because those are sort of Richard's bread and butter, right? The goblin guys. But I'll have to dig through the goblin side of life and see what I can think up that kind of has existed throughout the editions.
Can I share
But
one thing before we go, real
sure.
quick? Okay, so we saw on your first slide, Tim, the cover of Supplement One Greyhawk. A couple of years ago, Errol Otis did a tribute to that for Gary Con,
Mhm.
and I've got that image right here. So you're talking about
Ooh.
fantastic and nightmare inducing art.
If it's Errol Otis, I mean, we got to look at it.
Yeah,
Wow.
there you go. That's Errol's tribute to the Supplement One Greyhawk cover, and
Oh.
in the crystal ball back there, that is a visage of Gary. So that is such a lovely piece.
That's
That's
awesome.
so cool.
I just had to sneak that in there. That is such an awesome piece.
If it's Errol Otis, I'm always all behind that one. He's one of my top 3 fantasy artists, I think,
Mhm.
of all time. He's in that short list. Frank Frazetta is always at the top of my list because Frank, you can spot. I actually missed one the other day. I was looking at some old books and I was like, yeah, I don't know who did the cover of this one, but I was like tipping my tongue, like not quite getting it. And I posted it on Twitter, and of course somebody goes, "Oh, it's Frank Frazetta." I was like, "God, how did I miss that?" Because his muscle definition on characters was always so specific to him.
Oh yeah.
Right. He just was sort of that. You can always pick his stuff out, and who doesn't remember the Death Dealer? I mean, it was just one of those all time
Yeah.
classic ones. But and his work was amazing. So but he was probably always my number one. I know I don't think he ever did anything for Dungeons and Dragons, but he was always around the fantasy world somewhere. But if I had to pick, amongst the living guys, of course, Richard, you're on that short list of people because your goblins are always sort of so goblin-y, right? They're just so awesome. You've got one on, and Bill, I'm going to ask you to find it because you're faster at finding these things than I am. You've got one on your Instagram page that I want to show off. It's a goblin version of Yoda. You know the one I'm talking about, Bill?
Yeah, I believe so. Let's see.
Oh, the Yoda one I did? Yeah.
Yeah, that is one of my. Every time I see that, I'm like, I love that picture. It's just so amazing to me. It's the Yoda crosser. It's probably something you did in like an afternoon, and you're like, oh yeah, that was simple. But to me, it was so creative and unique, that sort of crossover between the two. That I'm like, not only is it Yoda, but you can tell instantly it's a Yoda goblin. It's
Yeah.
neat.
I've got it here. At least I think I've got it here, or maybe this is just Yoda. Um, let me see if I can bring this up real quick. All right, OBS, don't fail me now. There we go. And we'll switch that on. Is that the one?
That's the one. Yeah.
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 I
So-
did a trick with that one that I do sometimes, which was I had a little sketch, and I just sketch. It's always something, goblin-y or this or that. Yeah, I did the sketch, and then I actually found a weird, like this weird, like brownish greenish toad,
Mhm.
you know, and I
Mhm.
kind of liked the palette. So I was sort of like, I'm gonna try to do them in that palette, like just the palette of this weird little toad thing. So it was actually pretty fun.
Yeah, I love that. That one, I'm like, that is just awesome. Because that crossover between universes is pretty neat. So um
Yeah.
maybe there should have been a Star Wars Dungeons and Dragons crossover, but I'm quite sure that would have been TSR would
Gamorrean
have been like, nah.
space orcs.
Huh?
Gamorrean guards from Return of the Jedi or space orcs. Change my mind.
There you
I'll
go.
have, I'll have to send you some, Tim. I'll send you some other sketches I did that were Star Wars. My take on Star Wars.
You know, I got into this discussion with somebody about Star Wars recently. Like, oh, what do you think? You know, because I'm old enough that I saw episode 4 when it was released the first time in the theater. I was a young kid, but apparently, so the story went. My dad used to tell the story all the time that I annoyed him into taking me quite often, and my mother was like, "Can't take him; he's too young. And if you take him, you got to take his older sister." And he wanted to take me, but not my sister Sharon. And sure enough, he took both of us because it was the only way he's going to get to take me. And I came out with like 20 questions about space cannons and lightsabers and all this other stuff. And my sister came out having nightmares because of what somebody cut somebody else's arm off and, you know, ships exploded. And I was like, this is cool. Right. And sure enough, I went on to get a PhD in physics and work on weird shit. So my dad was like, it was kind of interesting that one of them didn't sleep for a week and the other one like turned physics into a career. But it yeah, it was one of those movies that was so early on in my life. I was, you know, I wasn't even 10 yet. That and Buck Rogers when it actually had a theatrical release that was the TV show version of Buck Rogers.
We
Um
we know what drew us all to Buck Rogers. We don't, you
yeah,
know,
it was
credit
the
sequence.
Colonel. Yeah. But
Endearing.
Yeah.
yeah, sure, I was watching reruns of that the other day and my 14-year-old was glued to the screen. I don't understand it. But
Henley, Princess Ardala.
yeah, well, it to me, it's those are the sorts of things that caused you know these sorts of at least influences in my life to go off in the direction I went in because you know I started asking questions and apparently I haven't stopped because I still ask them. Like I was talking to some people the other day trying to get a Dungeons and Dragons game together that both you guys will be involved in. And I'm not going to release any information about it just yet because there's some really big names involved. But I was calling back to my old stomping grounds at MIT, trying to see who wanted to play, and there was, of course, intense interest from all kinds of people. Because they're like, "Wow, I get to play, and like nobody's going to call me professor." I'm like, I guarantee you, some of you people who I've taken home drunk from bars, I will not refer to you as professor ever. It is not going to happen. Because having worked with these people over the, because I worked there for what 12 years or something. It is an interesting place to work. But they all are very creative. And one of the things I like about scientists is they always keep asking questions, right? At least the very good ones always are on that edge of, I got to understand this. I want to understand more. But the other thing that's going to drive poor Bill, our DM, crazy is they're also shockingly creative people. So they will come up with new ways to get at stuff. And even the DM, I'm hoping, is like, shit, I didn't think about that. So
We'll see.
we'll see if they can be more creative than the guy who used to work with Gary Gygax. That might it's going to be a close one. So, all right, thank you, gentlemen, and thank you everybody for watching. Click like, subscribe, follow. I'll link to Bill's stuff in the comments and to Bill's channel, so you can click subscribe on that one too if you're not already. We'll see everybody on the next video.